Well, good afternoon and welcome to the homestead. My name is Jonathan. I greet you warmly, but without a smile. Today, it is a somber day. It is a day that I fear for the safety of my close friends, friends that I consider family in the nation of Ukraine, who has been unprovoked and attacked by the Russian Federation. Last night, I was laying in bed. I was just getting ready to kind of doing my reading, getting ready to go off to sleep whenever um, the artillery bombardment began and the bombs began falling. And of course, at that point, because of the fog of war, we didn't know exactly what the situation was. But as the situation has unfolded, we understand that Ukraine is under a full scale invasion. And so I would ask for each of you watching this afternoon that you would please be in prayer for our friends. And I will take some time today or this afternoon to share just a little bit about some of the work that's going on in Ukraine and some of the mission projects that my wife and I and two of our children have been involved in over the last 13 years. And I think one of the things, just as in way of introduction for Porch Talk today, one of the things that's important for us to remember that Ukraine is not a small third world country, somewhere else in the world in a faraway place. It is the second largest country in Europe. It has been a free republic for almost 30 years. And it has really, I think, on a larger scale, it marks the beginning of what is a second Cold War and perhaps even a hot war against the former Soviet Union. And I say that intentionally because I recognizing that while legally the Russian Federation calls itself something different, I think we see a mindset at this point that is determined to restore, at least in some of its glory, the former Soviet Union. And so we remember them today. I can't speak for anyone else, but personally, I stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and with their idea of freedom and the republic, the idea that there can be law and justice and fairness and right of due process of law and for free elections. And so it is a sad day for freedom in our world. It is concerning that Ukraine may stand alone against its aggressor. And that's not a political statement for or against any actions taken or not taken by the United States. That's just my personal feelings of concern for a country that is not technically, I guess, a part of NATO, but a NATO ally in this sense of fellowship and friendship to the United States, a major trading partner. And so it is a somber day. And while my heart is at peace and full of joy, and I'm thankful for the freedoms that I am enjoying in this moment, I recognize that there are many friends that whose freedom has been shattered today. And so we recognize that. I've been waiting for an official casualty list. 160 killed or wounded was an old number. I'm sure it's in the thousands at this point, with over 20 different cities being bombed. And it sounds like there's a three-way attack. There's amphibious attack from naval vessels off the Black Sea. There's artillery shelling that's going on from the eastern portion, from Russia proper, and then there's Belarusian missile attacks as well, just striking in pretty well all through Ukraine. It seems. I've spent pretty much, well, and I know several of you also deep into the night last night, and then most of the day today, trying to listen and understand about what the situation is, and so. It sounds like that Putin's goal is Kiev and complete control of Ukraine, not just a portion of it, but to completely take over the entire country. And so it is. It is what it is. I think many in the world are surprised. Certainly, the stock market was surprised as it sold off for this morning, and I think a lot of people felt this was political posturing, that he would not make good on his threats, and in fact, it is the case. And I've been in contact with some of our friends in Ukraine. The church, the local church there, is setting up a shelter for those that are have been wounded in the war, and they are collecting medical supplies, food, water, basic items to help as people, as refugees, and as people who are wounded in combat are brought into those villages, those areas, and they have already been receiving a lot of wounded, from what I understand, a lot of bloodshed. So we are going to be taking a love offering from River Bluff Fellowship to send to um, one of the Christian schools, and also the church, our sister church that is there in Comitates, and I'll have more information about that towards the end of this video. So let's begin, though. I obviously, for me personally, the situation in Ukraine is a very emotional one, and it's a big deal. But I don't want to spend our entire time talking about it today. Certainly, it is important, and in fact, I have moved this edition of Porch Talk. We're going to be talking about sound money. I'm moving that to next week, so we will pick that topic up next week. But I think it is correct for me to go in a different direction today and talk on more of a geopolitical scale in light of the way that the world has changed over the last 24 hours. Not to say that it was a peaceful world by any means. There's been terrible things happening on the war with terror over the last 20 years, so I'm not diminishing that in any way. But this is really the first time since the end of World War II, which was a very long time ago, since this type of a land invasion of this scale has been attempted, and the implications of what this could mean on the global scale has occurred. It's really the first time that really in my lifetime, even though we talk about World War III, we talk about another great war, it's really the first time in my lifetime that the pieces have fallen in place where there are alliances being drawn, and there are situations that are moving into position that could put us in a very precarious situation. And so we're going to be discussing some of that, also looking to the scriptures so that we can understand how these things occur, what our response should be in understanding them, and then where we go from here, because I think that's very important. I am a big actuator. I cannot stand complacency and apathy, even though I am guilty of it frequently. It is just intolerable for me, and I believe that we all have a responsibility to respond and to help and to make the world a better place where we can. So as we get into that, and as we think about that, I would like for us to go back. If you're old like me and you know what a rewind button is, push the rewind button on the tape player and go back 2 years to February of 2020, when the very beginning of as we have labeled it for the YouTube algorithm, the global situation or the global crisis began to unfold, and it began to be clear that this was not going to be a regional event, but a worldwide event. And we began to make some statements and some assessments of what the situation would be and how it would affect us as Americans. And of course, even at that time, I can remember, and I'm sure many of these videos have magically disappeared off of the internet, but I can remember many news stories, many articles from very wise and prominent people saying, "Oh, this is no big deal. This is going to go away in a week. It's going to be just like," and they named XYZ situations. And while we can debate, what really happened, how significant and how perhaps impactful that situation was in reality, I know there are strong opinions on both sides, so we're not going to get into that. But the fact of the matter is, it did have a profound impact on our economy, on the world, how we do business. It accelerated many trends, especially in the digital world. I mean, the world metaverse, while it existed, was barely even a term at that point. And now, of course, work, much more work or employment for Americans and other people who work across the globe has gone online. Office buildings are vacant as people no longer go to the office for that 9 to 5 job. I know some of you do. Some of you are saying, well, wait a minute, I got skipped. I got overlooked. So by no means I'm saying that in a general sense that a lot of companies realize it was much less expensive to have their employees work from home, and there are other ways to monitor and to communicate and handle strategic operations for those businesses, large and small. And so the world has changed in so many ways. The last holdouts of people that were not on social media finally jumped on board. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe they went kicking and screaming, but they finally broke down, got that Facebook account, got that Twitter account, whatever it is, whatever kind of social media, Rumble. And now, of course, former President Donald Trump's new social media platform, Truth, just launched, I believe, on Monday. It might have been Tuesday. I may be off a day or two on it. Immediately had 400,000 subscribers and the first 1 second, I think, of launch, and then now you have to be on a waiting list, I think, to get in there. So social media has become a big deal, and a lot of people are participating in that, communicating on that, and of course, other forms of currency like Bitcoin and Ethereum have become a mainstream way of commerce and sending funds abroad. It's much faster, it's much cheaper, it's much more efficient, and it's sound money in many senses. And of course, that is a very debatable statement, and we will debate that and discuss what are the positives and negatives of that change and of other changes. Obviously, social media has its downside, no question about that. Working from home has its downside. So we're going to be looking at a lot of these things, not necessarily in terms of their moral right or wrong, but just in the case of matter of factly their impact on our lives, and then at the end of that, make moral judgments on those things and how they affect our lives. So let's take just a moment, as hopefully you've been pushing that remind button in your mind, you've been thinking about that. And one of the first things that I want us to go back and look at is one of the things that we said, and I want us to really be honest with ourselves about this. This is not a time to be like, ooh, look at us, we were so smart. We were preppers when only 8% of Americans were preppers instead of the whatever it is now, 31%. What sounds like the sheep have caught on. I was trying to hide over here in this corner, but they've caught on. They've caught on to me. Well, so let's begin to just honestly assess. If we were wrong on some things, well, great. Failure is the great teacher, and you can quote me on that. I can't remember who I stole that from, but it is absolutely true. We learn more from failure than honestly we do success many times. So we will look at the things that we were correct about, and then we will learn from the things we were not correct about, and that helps us be better prepared for the things that are to come. And believe you me, I think there is probably no question that we are just getting into global instability. And that is not to say that the future isn't bright and that there isn't periods of prosperity that are coming, that great things are not coming for our children and grandkids. I believe they are. I'm an optimist, and in spite of all the chaos and uncertainty, or the FUD, as we like to say in the financial markets, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, I think the future is bright, but there are going to be challenges, and part of that future being bright is how we invest ourselves in that future. And if we choose to fight against how this world was created and fight against its natural laws and fight against those things that bring prosperity, then the future may not be bright. It may be full of curses and consequences. And so I believe it is prudent and wise of us to consider these things. So let's take them one at a time. The first item on our list in our assessment for the last 2 years is food. And we said that we believed that food was very inexpensive, that there would be supply shortages as a result of the instability and the situation of factories shutting down and farms, and we we had a lot of situations there, especially at the beginning, where you couldn't get animals in for slaughter, and so we were losing a lot of livestock just without, just farmers having to put them down because there was no way to feed them, there was no way to get feed. Or to get them to market to sell, and it was just a very difficult time. Sheep were and I can confirm this because we just sold in November, and I know meat prices have gone up even more since then. But even at that point, we sold almost three times the price of what they were selling for at that time. I mean, prices were really, really low. And so our assessment was that not only would there be supply shortages, but also food prices would rise. Was that correct? Yes, that was correct. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist or get a scientific calculator out to understand that when you go to a restaurant, when you go to the store to buy, especially, well, what I call real food, so not necessarily plastic processed junk, but, and of course that stuff is also more expensive, but particularly things like lean meats, fruits, vegetables, anything that we might be a little bit on the organic side, that doesn't isn't just pumped full of hormones and pesticides, which again I'm not against. I do believe there is a place for preservatives and some of those things. Because otherwise the world would starve. So please don't hear me taking a making a political statement with that. I'm just saying, like most human beings, you would like to eat a higher quality food if you can. Now, some of us choose not to eat the higher quality food, but I think generally we would like that. So those foods in particular are very, very expensive. So were we correct in assessing that? Yes, we were. And in fact, if you are eating on the food that you purchased back then, canned goods, oats, whatever it was, then you are eating for almost half price generally. I mean, I think it was something like 37% over the last 2 years increase in food. So not quite doubled by any means, but it has gone up substantially. So if you had a grocery budget that was $100 a week, $200 a week, whatever it is, depending on how large your family is, well, then now that budget has increased substantially. In fact, I haven't done the math on it, but even with the rise in wages, I'm not sure that by the time you consider energy and you consider food prices, just those two things alone, that your wage is actually less because of the inflationary pressure on food and in particular energy. So those are those two things. Number two, or first thing. Number two, the power grid. We had concerns that the power grid could not sustain all the disruptions in coal or renewables or different things, and that we would have struggles, that prices would begin to get very expensive, and that we would experience perhaps some rolling blackouts, either due to people not being able to be there to keep power going, or some of the disruptions with the diminishing coal supply and higher renewables, and sometimes the reliability isn't quite there. Even though I'm a big renewable guy, we have 48 solar panels on our barn. So again, please don't. I'm not in love with big oil or anything like that. I'm a renewable guy. Right now, it takes both. You can't have just one and you can't or the other. You need both of them. Is the reality of that. So um, what was correct or incorrect about that? Well, we were correct in the sense that prices have risen. In fact, we are just at 100% increase in natural gas, not quite on electricity, and obviously gasoline, diesel, electricity, which is heavily subsidized. We've not quite seen that yet. But I think that probably will follow. We'll see what happens this upcoming summer. But with 7.5% year over year inflation, and that number is accelerating, not decelerating or even staying the same, I think we can expect to see that number rise. So we were correct in that sense, but we were not correct in the sense that we would see a lot of rolling blackouts. Actually, the power grid, impressively, was very strong. And was able to, the people that needed to be on the job, handling that situation, they were there and they were handling it. And in fact, I have a good friend who works for a utility company in a neighboring area, and I mean he was masked up and had his, all his protective gear on, and he went to work and he worked hard under very difficult situations, a difficult situation. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate them, their hard work. And so that demonstrated to me that the power grid actually was pretty resilient. Now, that's not to say that it could withstand an EMP or anything like that. And if we really get into it with Russia and or China in the near future, and we start EMPing or cyber attacking each other, well, this video may be this portion of this video may become useless. But as far as the global situation that occurred a couple years ago, the power grid did demonstrate while prices went up dramatically, it was actually pretty resilient. All right, the third item, the economy. We said several interesting things because I think this category we could spend an entire porch talk discussing it. We're not going to do that, so don't panic and just be like, okay, I'm done. But just briefly, a couple of the high points. We determined there would be a lot of inflation. Is there a lot of inflation? Absolutely. There's supply shortages. There's the monetary supply has been diluted in a terrible way, and I don't think the word terrible is an exaggeration. The money printing is just absurd. We printed another $10 trillion and added it to the national debt, and that's not even taking into consideration quantitative easing and all the other things that have happened with that. So that clearly was the case, and we determined that basically just generally economically life would not be as good. We would have less discretionary spending. That has ended up being the case. There was a time when we were getting free helicopter money from the government where it was like, oh, we got extra money, we can buy this or buy that. But that money has pretty much been spent at this point from 95% of people that received it. So mostly on food at this point. And or energy costs. So that ship has really sailed, and we're the easy money is gone, and now we are suffering the consequences of that easy money policy. And in fact, with rising interest rates, it's going to be interesting to see what housing does. Obviously, housing has been one of the worst hit industries, with prices just going parabolic. And a lot of disagreement about whether they're going to come back down or whether they're high to stay. And honestly, at the very beginning, having lived through the housing crisis before, I was like, oh man, this is just a bubble. It's not going to stay like this. But I have to recant my words now that I've seen how high inflation is. I do think these prices are here to stay. And while we might get a little temporary relief at some point in the year, I think housing prices only have one way to go, and that is up. So we'll take a look at it 2 years from now and see if that is correct. But there are just too many people chasing after too little land, and with rising cost to build homes and cost to farm and move heavy machinery around to dig wells and septic systems and things. It's just that's going to be a challenge. All right, the next area, we were concerned about UBI, that is Universal Basic Income. Now, I understand that there can seem to be some positives from this, and I also understand that with increasing automation, factories requiring less and less people, even fast food restaurants now becoming automated, robots that mow your yard, vacuum your house, just a lot of things. And I think the technology to this point has not been spectacular, or what I would say spectacular. I do believe, based on some of the things, particularly that Tesla has been doing, we are going to see an age of robotics, and you are going to see robots doing a lot more than just self-driving cars and those kind of things. They are going to be performing complex tasks. You may or may not be aware, the new Alexa, the next generation of Alexas will actually drive around in your house. And the newest ones follow you when you talk. The screen moves and follows you, but the next iteration will actually be able to go around your house, do security monitoring, talk to you, and then after that, of course, I'm sure they'll be performing basic tests. So we're going to see a pretty big move in that direction. And so what does that mean for people that do manual labor? Well, to some extent, it does mean there's going to be a period of displaced workers. And right now, it seems like you can't find any workers. But I think probably that particular problem is going to be solved here pretty soon when people have to get a second and third job just to keep up with inflation. And what's going to happen is those jobs will not be found, and we will find that that robots and other advanced machinery. Robot sounds really sci-fi, so we'll just say advanced machinery will be taking those jobs. I mean, just like it's been doing for the last 100 years since the Industrial Revolution. And so there may be a legitimate um, need for some level of universal basic income while we transition to a different kind of economy. Not that's not a I'm not endorsing that. I'm not hating on it. I'm just kind of saying it matter of factly. But one of the concerns that we had 2 years ago was that there would be some major steps taken towards that those who were working, those who were taxpayers, would have to foot the bill on. Did that happen? Yes, it did. Free helicopter money started coming every month in the forms of checks, and people got used to that. They quit their jobs. That's what created some of the supply chain catastrophe, and what has contributed to us being in this very difficult labor market that we're in right now. And so we did take some very dramatic steps towards UBI, and we probably have not seen the last of that. So I think we're pretty correct in that assessment. And then lastly, we assessed that because of the response of governments throughout the world, we would experience a loss of liberties or personal freedoms. And, this is where I know it can become a sore spot. The situation with the truckers in Canada, I know, is controversial. But you have to understand that even while the global situation is a threat, we also rely on people transporting our food to us and our goods, and we need them, and we need to value them and not dismiss them or treat them like serfs or servants or peasants. And so I am concerned that some governments have elected to prevent them from working and from delivering our goods. And so that is a significant problem. And those types, and that's just one example of loss of freedoms. But I mean, think about it. You sometimes to travel now, you have to have a special card that gives you permission to do that. Um, is the government more aware of tracking you and who you are and where you are and what you're doing? They most certainly are. And so that's a concern. And I do think we have seen our freedoms restricted somewhat. And I do want to make one comment that I don't think is necessarily controversial, but it does concern me greatly. And this is idea, or this is not an idea. This is what has happened with the truckers. When Canada declared them enemies of the state, that gave them special powers because of recently uh, changed legislation, which, by the way, also exists in the United States, to seize their bank accounts and take their money. And that did not happen prior to the global situation. And that does greatly concern me because if for whatever reason what you believe conflicts with what the state wants you to believe or do, then they can control you and take your liberties and freedoms. And we have seen that played out over the last 2 weeks. And I am greatly concerned about that. And I think that we were correct in assessing that. So there's just we could probably go on and replay a lot of videos and think through a lot of things and say, oh, this was correct, this was not correct, or this was correct in some ways, not correct in other ways. So, I think it's good just to do that, though, to just have that self assessment, and I think that's what keeps us grounded and on track. All right, well, moving on, let's get to. I know the you guys don't have all day, and at some point it's going to get dark out here, so need to get to the point. Not that that wasn't the point, but move on to the next topic, which is kind of our discussion about the situation in Ukraine, how it impacts us, why it's significant, and so on and so forth. And then we're going to actually be looking at the Apostle Paul, and one of his stories regarding the Old Testament and the nation of Israel, found in First Corinthians, and which I shockingly, it really just hit me this morning how applicable God's message to Israel is, and their response, and the situation they were in, and how applicable that is for us today. And so we're going to be taking a look at that. But for that to be relevant to what we're talking about, I think, if for those of you who are not fully informed about the situation in Ukraine, first of all, go back and pause this if you're not watching live, which I know most people are not. Last week we had 67 people view, and I just want to take a moment and say how thankful and humbled I am that we had that many people view. And so thank you so much for your time, and I hope that the information was meaningful to you. I guess if we only have 15 views this week, I'll know it wasn't very meaningful. But in the event that perhaps it was, and we have a good response, I want to say thank you to you for taking the time out to watch this video. But for most of you who are watching this, later on, push the pause button, pause button, and go back and just listen to last week's the section about Ukraine if you haven't listened to that, so that you can kind of understand the history of the nation of Ukraine, how it became the way that it is, a free republic, when it was a former Soviet nation, and why this is such a big deal, and why it does go back so much to World War II and the Cold War, and a lot of those geopolitical situations. The first thing that I guess want to challenge us with is a term, and that term is called normalcy bias. First, let me define what normalcy bias is. And I actually looked at about 5 different definitions, and I picked the one that I felt was the most accurate. And it is this: normalcy bias is the mental state people enter when facing a disaster that causes them to underestimate its effects. Okay, so that was a lot. So let's take that apart. Let's understand what that means. So it would be a little bit like this. I'm sitting here on the porch. I'm expecting that for the next, 30 or 40 minutes, however long this video goes, that I'm going to be here to be able to share with you. Otherwise, I wouldn't take the time to set this up or put myself, if I knew that bullets were going to fly, or if a nuclear bomb was going to explode behind me, or, the sheep were going to rebel and storm the homestead, or storm the house, well, then I would have taken precautions to deal with any of those situations. But my normalcy bias is that right now I'm thinking all is well. It's just going to be a peaceful afternoon. And for the last 99 out of 100 times that I've sat here in my rocking chair on the porch, everything's been normal. The sheep have been moaning and whining about whatever over there, just like they always do. It's just another day on the porch on the homestead. Okay, so that would be my normalcy bias. And I often would underestimate perhaps some of the risks of things that might happen to me while I'm sitting on the porch. Now, consider for a moment some of the facts of that. So let's just take that example that I've given. Is it reasonable for me to think that I can sit here peacefully and safely on this porch? Well, probably. I mean, I have pretty good neighbors. There's not a lot of crime in this area, at least at this time. It's a fairly calm part in the afternoon. My children that are home from school know, like, hey, Dad's out doing something on the porch, so don't go crazy running around on the porch. And my wife is handling the little dogs, which are definitely the most unruly part of the homestead. So, generally, it's probably a reasonable thing to assess. But what if 5 miles away there was an enemy army of 180,000 people that really didn't like me or my country or what I stood for, and they all had guns and planes and tanks, and they were threatening to come and kill me? Would that change anything? Well, I think probably the answer would be yes. That would definitely change how I would view the safety of myself at this point, sitting here on the porch. And that is not, you may be kind of putting two and two together. Okay, you're talking about the Russian army, you're talking about Ukraine. I'm just saying it's very different in one place than in another place. And so sometimes, however, we fail to assess those details, and so we just go on expecting things to happen normally like they always have, because at some point, even though 99 out of 100 times, a danger could come to this farm, and if I just assume that it's always going to be perfectly fine, when that danger comes, I am going to be in trouble. And that is what I want to challenge us with today. And that is what many Ukrainians have experienced over the last 24 hours, that things have been normal for almost 30 years. They know they have a hostile country next to them. But because it's just things have heated up so slowly, many Ukrainians were caught unprepared. Now, before we get into this, I want to say I know many Ukrainians were not unprepared. They had food, they had water, they had a plan to escape long before it got to this point. So I'm using this not as a condemnation on them by any means. If anything, it's a condemnation on Americans and those who feel way too secure in our situation and need to invest a lot more time and energy into being prepared and being ready for challenges. But just to understand, how we can get sucked into this, just kind of assuming everything's always going to be fine, it's always going to be the way that it's been, that assuming can end in catastrophe. And when I watched on the news today, I saw, people standing in long lines at banks trying to get money, of course, which there was none because cyber attacks had taken out most of the financial system. They didn't know why cell phones wouldn't work and things. I mean, I'm sure they know now, but they were expecting for them to work, expecting for there to be food in the grocery stores, and there were people just coming out with full carts, and then people standing in lines forever down the road. And so part of me just really thinks, wow, some people did wait until the bombs literally were dropping to think, oh, I need food, I need water, I need medical supplies, I need money. So, which at that point, what, I'm not sure what good cash was at that point anyway, because who's going to give up their food or their water at that point, or certainly not medical supplies. So, those are the kind of things that when I see that, I realize, and honestly, and I don't mean this as a judgment on Americans at all. Ukrainians are probably significantly more prepared than us just because they've experienced war. Even someone my age has experienced war in Ukraine on multiple occasions, and of course they've had kind of an ongoing problem with insurgency in Crimea since 2014. So they probably were very much more prepared than perhaps some of us, and perhaps I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. So I think that is probably the first thing, for us to capture a kind of a gut check, kind of a reality check, like, hey, is that me? It's kind of like if you're like, if I ask you, well, hey, what's the weather like? But you have a giant sleeping bag like over your whole body, and it's covering your head, so you can't really sense what the temperature is or see what the conditions are like. You can't really hear anything, if it's raining or whatever, because you're just covered by this giant sleeping bag. Well, that's kind of how some of us live our lives, that we're just somewhat ignorant, and I'm not meaning that in an accusatory way, but we're just unaware of the challenges and problems that we could face. And so we are setting ourselves up for failure. Remember the 5 P's. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. All right, say that 5 times really fast. That little phrase hopefully will help you not fail. All right, moving on. The dangers of the normalcy bias can be found in many different ways. We've discussed financially, we've discussed in terms of safety and security, we've discussed in terms of food and supplies. And honestly, the phrase that seems to, all right, not the phrase, but the line of thinking that seems to really cause us the most harm is when we think to ourselves, it can't happen to me, or even it probably won't happen to me. And that may actually be true. And we can't really be prepared for every situation in life. There are times where we just have to fall back and realize and understand uh, who we worship, whether we're, if you are a believer and you're watching this, you understand that you're trusting that God is going to provide, that He is going to he is the creator of everything that is. He is the one who's created natural laws, and He is the one who has said, here is how you are to live and how you are to respond in those situations. And so we find faith and solace in that, and comfort in that, and purpose in that. If you're not a believer, then perhaps, what is it? What is the way that you think about those things, or how do you approach those things, or deal with those things? That's a question only you can answer. But when we have that idea or that mentality that it can't happen to me, well, then when it does, you are in a very, very tough situation. And so we have the opportunity right now, because of the relative, notice I use the word relative prosperity that we are experiencing. We have time to prepare still. It is not too late. You may be kicking yourself because you're paying through the nose for food right now when you could have stockpiled a while ago. You're upset because you didn't invest in the stock market. And I think, one of the things we said 2 years ago is this easy money policy and inflation is going to be one of the greatest times to invest in the history of, or in our lifetimes. And that's been true. I mean, the S&P 500 up 27%, the NASDAQ even more than that. Crypto 10xing, gold almost doubling. I mean, it has been absolutely incredible. Millionaires and billionaires have been made. And now that time's passed, and you may be kicking yourself and just saying, "Oh, I can't believe I didn't listen to anyone around me saying that, or I didn't get invested." Hey, like I said, failure is the great teacher. This is the time where you face that. And if you were one that had normalcy bias, you're like, "Oh, that can never happen. There'll never be disruptions to our supply chain, or people not able to work, or that's never going to happen." And then it does. That's when you say, "Hey, you know what? I was wrong about that. What can I do to not get taken advantage of, or to miss an opportunity the next time?" And that's the conversation we're having today. And the fact that you're actually listening and considering that demonstrates wisdom. So fist bump, good job on that. All right. So then the next thing, what causes overconfidence? And this is really where I want us to begin to transition and to look. And again, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So if you have a Bible and you want to follow along and look to see for yourself what the Apostle Paul has to say, then I would encourage you to do that. I'm going to be switching over here on my iPad in just a minute from my notes. But I want to ask this question, and for you to be thinking about it in light of this passage. But what is this that causes you to be overconfident? What is it that causes you to perhaps think that you are better able to handle a situation than you are? But perhaps what are the elements that contribute to that line of thinking? Well, let's take a minute. I'm going to flip over here, get my Bible open. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And my fingers are a little frozen, so give me just a second. I had to take my glove off in order to do that. And I've got my big, thick Carhartt gloves on this week. I put my little black gloves on last week, and that did not get it done. So we have upgraded to the thicker ones today. Let's just take a moment and read this together, beginning in verse 1. "Now I want you to know, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, passed through the sea, and were baptized into Moses, and in the cloud and in the sea." All right, so what are we talking about? We're talking about the Old Testament. We're going back to the time where God, and through Moses and Aaron and Miriam and other leaders, He led them out of slavery in Egypt, and His idea was to lead them to a new kingdom, a place of prosperity and goodness and liberty and freedom. But because of their, and honestly, normalcy bias was a big part of that, but because of their foolishness, they ended up in a disaster for 40 years before they ever got to that place. And if that sounds at all like your life right now, well, then keep listening. I think this will be helpful to you. So he's referring to that, the events that came. And then it says, then all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from a spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But God was not pleased with most of them, for they were struck down in the wilderness. So generally what happened, and we're going to see a little bit of this, is the Israelites decided that they were kind of used to how things were in Egypt. They weren't really sure that they were ready for freedom, and they didn't really believe that they had the military ability to be faithful to what God had said. And he said, hey, these people that are living here are evil. I'm bringing judgment upon them. I'm going to give you the power to remove them from their place. Well, they did not trust God in that. And in fact, they created another God. They did the very thing that God forbid them to do. They created an idol, and one of Moses' right-hand guys was one of the people that led them in that, shockingly. And so it just goes to show you how even with the best of our intentions, how easy it is for us to look straight at reality. I mean, look behind me. You can see for a mile at least, and to be able to look right there and miss the trees, you know, that those trees can be right there in the video, and you completely miss the fact that they're there. And so that's what happened. In fact, let's go on and read them. It says, now these things became examples for us, so that we will not desire evil things as they did, and not become idolaters as some of them were. Because as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to play. Let us not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in a single day, 20,000 people fell dead. Let us not test Christ, as some of them did, and were destroyed by snakes. Nor should we complain, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as examples, as they were written as a warning to us, on whom the ends of the ages have come. And I think today, when things like what is happening in Ukraine occurs, it is a reminder to me, it is a warning to me that I don't somehow exist in some safe zone or some sanctuary where I am immune to the perils of life. And in fact, I have spent probably the last 2 years have been not my finest 2 years. I've been in the hospital 3 different times. Once for shattering one of my bones into a million pieces, once for being in the hospital with COVID, and once for colliding with one of my children playing a game, and I had to get like 10 stitches over here on my face. So I've not had the best time probably of my life the last 2 years, and that doesn't get into all the other hardships. But so it's on my radar a little bit more. This kind of idea of like, hey, I'm not invincible. Things can come up that are right in front of me, but yet I do not see. I mean, who would have thought that running through the dark on an icy ground, chasing after a coyote trying to save a lamb, with no gun, the wrong shoes, and just running off unprepared would have caused me to break a bone. I mean, who could have thought? I'm so surprised that the result of that action ended the way that it did, which is a ridiculous statement. But at the time, I wasn't really thinking through the implications of the decisions that I was making. And I hope that today, as our president and our other leaders whom I pray for, and hope that they will represent us as a nation the best they can, I hope that they are thinking through the ramifications of their actions or non-actions. Because frankly, the United States was one of the nations that when Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, you know what they did? Not a lot. And where did that get us several years later, when millions of people were being killed, and many of them being young American men and women who were fighting in what had become a world war? Now, I'm not saying that that is the situation now, and I'm not trying to be a prophet. I'm just saying I understand history, and I understand that if we don't understand it, we're doomed to make the same mistakes. Here we have another authoritarian aggressor invading a free country, and it seems that our response perhaps is not appropriate to handle or to restrain the individual or that aggressor or that authoritarian. Not passing judgment on anybody. I'm just trying to state from a historical standpoint that sometimes, you know, if we handle a situation very reactionary without thought and careful consideration and planning, and we try to do the safe thing, we can end up causing ourselves more harm in the end. Because safety, again, according to our normalcy bias, can lead us into a place of real, true danger. Going back to what Paul was saying about Israel, Israel had a tremendous opportunity for prosperity, but they ended up, and it wasn't a lot of times we think, well, they delayed it 40 years, they finally got it. Well, that's actually not true. All of the people that were adults at the time that they rejected God's call to invade and to bring justice to the promised land and to take out all of the pagan idol worshippers and child sacrificers and all the terrible things that were happening in those places, whenever they were the ones to bring goodness to those geographical locations, and they rejected that and retreated from that notion, God punished all of them. When you can say it was direct, you can say it was he just allowed them to naturally pass away, but they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, if you know that story, and they all died. And finally, it was the next generation that was allowed to go into the promised land. And I hope that that speaks clearly to us so that today we can understand the struggles and the problems and the difficulties are not far away. They are right here. And we have an opportunity to speak out of love and of a sound mind and to speak generously but also forthrightly, because if we do not, we are just a party to or we are passively agreeing to let those who do evil become the drivers and the leaders and the instigators of our lives. And that's hard. I wish that I guess I was about to say I wish that I had lived during World War II. I'm not sure that that would be a wise or prudent statement, but I would say I deeply respect the families, the men and women who were from that quote unquote greatest generation, because they may have not been great when it started, but they sure were when it ended, because they endured a significant hardship and they came together. They teamed up with other like-minded nations, which eventually, of course, as we know today, that's NATO. You keep hearing so much about on TV, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I mean, that organization came as a response to the access of evil against authoritarian aggression, and we came together to say we lost millions of people in this generation to a terrible war because we didn't stand up together and do what was right. We didn't face evil. We didn't stop it. We didn't draw a line in the sand and say no farther, but we let it come to us, and we lost France. We lost the Netherlands, which I think was Holland back at the time, and many other countries fell victim to the access of evil. Certainly China suffering more casualties, more than the Holocaust, more than the Jews, more than Americans, more than French. They suffered a terrible atrocity under the brutality of the Japanese army. And so, of course, they should know better than anyone the effects of not standing up against an access of evil. And so today, as we examine this story in history and we understand the consequences of inaction, the consequences of not standing firm and of being confident in who we are and what we are called to do as individuals first, but then also collectively as communities, families, and as a nation, that there will be consequences. And I hope that we can learn from that. And so we come back to the original question about normalcy bias. Are you a victim? Have you been paralyzed by normalcy bias so that you don't fully can really see the trees, if we're going back to our example. And that is a question that only you can answer. And I hope today that perhaps in a thoughtful and kind way, but also a serious and stern way, have challenged you to ask that question about yourself. Is your family, is your community at risk because of that? And the solution, the answer to that, as always is throughout the scriptures, is repentance, to turn away, to begin to handle that situation differently, and to begin to recognize that, what, there are realities that are at play in my life that I have been putting off, I've been ignoring, I've been hoping they would just solve themselves. And frankly, I want to, this is not an excuse, but oftentimes in our educational system, even in our churches, in our society, we reward ignorance, we reward apathy. This whole idea of no child left behind, this kind of idea of let's just, give someone a passing grade so that they're not stuck, whatever. But the problem is, it's just like if you try to learn to read without learning the words, you're never going to learn to read. That at the end of the day, we all have to put in the hard work that it takes on so many levels to be a moral person, or to be a follower of Christ, to be someone who has understanding and uses wisdom in their decision making. If you are involved in a trade, in an industry, you have to put in the hard work to learn what it means to work with wood or metal, or to how to, if you're in the business world, how to lead people, and how to manage a business, and manage finances. And so those are all very difficult things. They take a lot of hard work and time. And if there's one thing that our culture does not like, it is hard work and time. I am surely the most impatient person on this video. I mean, I would bet you that I have less patience than anybody. I struggle with patience. I want to be a patient person, but on the inside, I am just like, I just want it all right now, and I don't want to have to put in that hard work. And you know what I think that is? I think that's human nature. We want an easy solution. We want an easy path. And it's just kind of like, if you've never had candy or chocolate or donuts or whatever it is that you love, you may not fully understand like what you're missing. This is why I tried to never get into drugs, because I figured once I did, it would be really hard for me to get out of that. And so I don't really know perhaps what I'm missing. I mean, I understand the negative consequences that I'm missing, but I also understand that it can feel pretty good for a while in the beginning. And if you don't know what sweets are, or chocolate, and you're not kind of like getting that daily dose, well then, you're not really struggling with it that much. And that's the problem that we have as Americans. We've gotten a dose of kind of easy living, and we have a very prosperous nation. We have had in the past an economy that's just on fire, powerful, and we're innovators. We're doing things. Our great grandparents, they conquered the Wild West, and they homesteaded, and they pioneered, and they went through terrible hardships to establish a national identity, and to establish a community and culture and a way of life. And we didn't do any of those things. We just received the reward of that. And that's the trouble. It's a blessing, but it's also a curse, because and I'm not saying that none of us have, but for the most part, most of us have been a beneficiary of that hard work. And so because we didn't earn it all ourselves, and we didn't have to pick up a rifle and fight for the land, I didn't have to pick up a rifle and fight for the land that's behind me, it's hard for me to truly understand the cost of that dirt, of that grass, of those trees. It's hard for me to understand what men and women gave up so that I could enjoy and have the privilege of being blessed with this farm. And I have to say, I have a grateful heart, and I am a man who, my heart goes out to those who are oppressed and who suffer and whose liberties and freedoms have been taken away or challenged, or who are at risk. And I today want to challenge you, if that matters to you at all, then perhaps you would consider doing something about it. And I want to say to you today that if you if you've never considered making Christ a part of your life, you have an opportunity to do that. It's not too late. And perhaps today you're listening to a lot of these things, you're thinking, well, man, I'm just not sure what part of my life God plays, or religion plays, or morality plays. But I want you to know that I believe that the scriptures and the history and the science and the evidence that is there is that we have a great creator who made all of these things. He warned us about the troubles. He made this beautiful garden. He created this perfect situation for us to live with him. And we kind of went our own way, and now we're suffering the consequences of that. And perhaps today you are done with that, and you're tired of the lies. You're tired of the hardship. You sense the enemy a few miles off of the door to your heart and your life, and you would like to do something about it. Would you send me a comment? Because I would like to talk with you more about that. For those of you that are watching today and you're believers, I would speak to you and ask you this. One, would you pray for our friends in Ukraine? Would you pray for our nation, for wisdom, for understanding, that we would make hard work and preparation an important part of who we are as Americans? And second, I would ask if you have a little bit of extra money, or if you just have it in your heart to give to help our sister churches. And we have a sister church and a sister school, Christian school, that is receiving refugees and those who that have been wounded in the bombardment and the artillery attacks, and they are treating them and helping them and giving them food and water and clothing. We are trying to raise some money to send. We are going to be sending that via cryptocurrency. We will be sending USDT stable coins directly to a digital wallet that they have, and that allows them to have those funds quickly. It's very inexpensive for us to send funds that way, and it lets us confirm and know that those funds have been received by them. And so we're going to be raising funds. If you would like to give, if you'll send me a message, you can give one of two ways. You can send me a message and I can give you the digital wallet, so you can give directly to, whether you've got Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever it is, you can convert that into stable coins, and we'll send that on. Or if you just have dollars, you've not yet gotten into the crypto world, you can write a check, or give to our church in terms of a love offering or a financial gift, and we will convert that for you into stable coins and get that sent on, so that money can be used as quickly as possible to get supplies to them. And of course, it's going to be challenging. They've got to get supplies across the border, and it's going to be tough. But we want to do what we can, and right now that's really all we can do, is pray and try to support and provide humanitarian aid for those who have been wounded, both for civilians and for those that are fighting in that war, the military. And so that is what we intend to do. And if you'd like more information about that, I would be happy to talk with you. You can also email me at pastorjhouse@hotmail.com. That's pastorjhouse@hotmail.com. Thank you guys for being a part of this video today. I hope that it has been beneficial and meaningful to you. If it has, would you please do this for me? Would you click the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so that you can be notified when we put out new videos and new content? And would you also go one step further? Would you share this video to your Facebook or Twitter or whatever? I don't know how TikTok works exactly, but if you can share a link on TikTok, we would like to try to get this series out, as well as our other content from River Bluff Fellowship. And it would really help us if you could just share this link, somewhere on your Facebook page, or, wherever, somebody that you maybe think could benefit from this information. That we really appreciate that. And again, I'm excited about this spring, about some of the things that are coming up. I think next week, if it might be one of the most controversial videos that I do this spring, but I think it probably, in terms of benefiting families in our community, in our church, and across the globe. I think that it could be one of the most beneficial in understanding some very important principles about sound money. And so I invite you to come and join us again next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Hope you are blessed. Hope you are safe. And for any of my friends in Ukraine that are able to have electricity and internet to watch this video, we stand in solidarity with you. We love you. We are praying for you. And may the Lord bless you. See you guys. Have a great week.